muted unless speaking, and if you've got a question or anything, please put your hands up. And if Zoom attendees can turn off their camera and microphone during any breaks or whilst others are speaking. We also have toilets out in the foyer, out here to my left. And just so that you're aware, the media may be present at any stage and could be filming part of the meeting. And if you need some hearing assistance, it's in the spaghetti factory just against the wall here. So we can find somebody to help you out with that if you need to use it. So how we're going to work today is we're going to listen to our submitters, and then we will have the staff report. We'll see how the timing goes. At that point, we could have a cup of tea, and then we'll move into the deliberations. And I think that is it. Now, with the presentations, we appreciate you all coming in today. You have 5 minutes, and I haven't actually worked out a timer, but we're not too pushed for time. And the panel members can ask questions for clarification if need be. Would also like to do a quick introduction. So we have, my name's Jo, and I'm chairing today. We have the councillors from the wards involved, so that's Richmond and Waimea and Lakes-Murchison. So we have Councillor McKenzie, Councillor Melling, Councillor Dakey, Deputy Mayor Bryant. Next to me, I have Grant Reburn, who's in charge of Parks and Reserves. We have Gavin on the flight deck. And for those of you here who've been dealing with Anna, so you may be familiar with her. So we don't have our first submitter who's on Zoom from Golden Bay. So Mr. Baigent, would you like to come up and present to us, please? Oh, okay, you just pop on your microphone.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so they're loud and clear now. Thank you. Okay, I'm not going to. I guess our submission was pretty straightforward, but I hope that this decision is pretty straightforward. But I thought I would just come along to ensure that the undertakings that council made to us as a family when we consented to vest to council this reserve at no cost to council, that they're front and centre of the consideration, as I hope they will be when we go further on to the more important stages when it is listed, of deciding how it's going to be used. So basically that's just pointing out that council did undertake to us that the reserve would be preserved within the Scenic Reserves Act to ensure that it's preserved for future generations under that act. And I guess that was pretty important to the family, because that then is not dependent on councils of the day and officials of the day. We want this to be a taonga, which it has been to our family for generations, as you probably know. We want that to proceed for generations. And it's really important to us that it's available to all of the public, and particularly the public of Wakefield. So as we go forward and look at how it's going to be used, it will be important to us that it is open to everybody and doesn't just become one use for dog park or whatever going forward. But that's for the future. So just coming back, just reiterating that classification under the Reserves Act was a given, really, in the discussions that we had with council, and asking that be top of mind in the considerations today. That's all I have to say at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baigent. And just while I've got the opportunity, I'd just like to thank you for your family for passing on that taonga to the whole community for everybody to use. It's a very important gift, and we really appreciate it. Do any of the panelists have any questions that you'd like to ask? No. So much for your presentation today. Mrs. South.
Have a loud voice. I have to sharpen up in the reserves.
If you could just pop on your speaker still though, because it's being recorded and it means that we can still hear you, but you're fine to stand if you wish. Thank you so much.
How's that? Okay. Firstly, thank you for allowing me as a private individual to attend and address you today. I have been a resident of Wakefield for over 40 years and a member of the Wakefield Bush Restoration Society 2000 Incorporated for 24 years. I fully support the move to formally classify Baigent's Bush at Wakefield as a scenic reserve under the Scenic Reserves Act classification 19(1)A. This adds to the other 3 reserves at Wakefield of this classification, which are administered by the Reserves Department of this council, to whom is added the extra weight of responsibility to adhere closely to the provisions of the Act for their protection. They are the Fulton Bush Scenic Reserve, the Edward Baigent Memorial Scenic Reserve, and the Robson Scenic Reserve. All of these reserves are part of the last remaining remnants of tall podiocarp forest left in Nelson Lowlands, and as such have significant ecological importance to our region. We cannot control the past, and there is much of the future that we cannot control either. However, the one thing we can control in relation to these 4 scenic reserves is to be totally aware of the negative overuse impact that humans and domestic animals can have on them. So by giving them all the highest classification under the Scenic Reserves Act is in turn making sure that they are still here for the future generations to enjoy. So just in summary, I personally see this as a fantastic opportunity to add another scenic reserve to the council reserves portfolio, and I'm sure they have over 400 plus others, and having the experience and expertise amongst your staff to get it so right from the start in maintenance and care, and above all, public awareness of what actually the scenic reserve status does mean. And this must come hand in hand with respect and understanding of these incredible tracts of land for all to enjoy. Thank you. Oh, any question?
Thank you very much, Mrs. South. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? Oh, if you'd just like to pop back up, Councillor Mackenzie's got a question for you.
Thank you very much. It's not a question, but just want to acknowledge the work of the Wakefield Bush Restoration Society and what you've done in Wakefield. It is tremendous, and actually, you know, living in that community, honestly, we are so privileged to have that suite of reserves really right in the heart of Wakefield, and you can just think in the generations to come that's going to be a massive thing for that community. So thank you to your society.
Yeah, I will pass that on. They really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. That's very well articulated for all of us. Mrs. Cook. Mr. Cook has a handout for us that he's going to pass around as well. Thank you.
Yes. Madam Chair and councillors, thank you for this opportunity. I would like to add to my submission my specific concern over the ongoing rampant spread of woolly nightshade throughout the Richmond area and beyond. The Tasman District Council is responsible for protecting its reserves from invasive plant species, as well as removing such plants from reserves. And there is a picture going to go up on the screen of what's happening here. Existing designated reserve areas, Eveline, Lodestone or Dillside, and the Jimmy Lee contain a significant remnant of rare lowland native forest. I acknowledge the TDC's involvement with volunteers in endeavouring to keep the reserves and the Kingsland Block clear of pest plants, a task that will become more difficult as plantings mature, camouflaging woolly nightshade. This is it here. That hillside there, no, up one, that one. That there is woolly nightshade. I realise that you'll know this plant, but the points I wish to emphasise are the spread of woolly nightshade, the toxicity of woolly nightshade, and the control of woolly nightshade on private land. Spread of woolly nightshade, the prolific seeds are spread by birds, enabling its rapid and widespread advance. Being adjacent to Kingsland Forest for 54 years, our property has been subjected to the spread of this plant onto our property. We know from experience how virulent, widespread, and invasive the seeds are. It thrived within the forest, and so the felling of the pines has left seed in the soil. More on this later. Woolly nightshade now features in urban Richmond. The toxicity of woolly nightshade. Woolly nightshade plants and trees produce a toxin which inhibits the growth of other plants. It forms dense stands, which you can see there, which outcompete native plants. The TDC information pamphlet omits to mention that the plant spreads aggressively or that it can be fatal if the berries are eaten by children, cattle, and pigs. Neither does it mention the reasons for donning a mask and gloves, being that it is a respiratory irritant. You'll probably cough for a month, and it may cause a fine, intensive rash. I've experienced both. The control of woolly nightshade on private land, a short history. This plant arrived in New Zealand in 1880. When I was a child, the Grampians and Nelson had these weird, spooky trees. In 1971, when my husband and I first came to Richmond, woolly nightshade was on the noxious plant list. Council employee Robin Van Zulen was vigilant and superb at spying out this plant, requiring owners to remove these plants. About 1995, the TDC decided that woolly nightshade would no longer be classified as a noxious plant, and despite impassioned pleas from the Nelson City Council's NILMAC, who'd made a huge effort eradicating it from the Grampians. Back then, this council made the appalling decision to declassify it. The current watch policy is a dismal failure. An example is the Eastern Foothills, that one there, of the Northern Hill Street area. This hillside is smothered in this plant, providing a seed bank for its rampant spread, not only into our reserves and native bush areas, but domestic gardens. So photo 2 will show you a 3-metre tall woolly nightshade in flower now at 345 Hill Street. Photo 3 shows, no, it's not that one. This is the 2-metre high sapling on the south side of the Jimmy Lee Creek on the walkway just below the Wilkes Reserve. Clause 2.3 states that the council shall provide for and ensure the use, enjoyment, maintenance, protection and preservation of the reserve. Toxic plants have no place in public areas. Clause 4.1, council shall ensure as far as possible the survival of indigenous species of flora and fauna. Woolly nightshade threatens the very survival of our native plants and trees by producing toxins which make the soil poisonous. Clause 6.18(4) states that the council will ensure that species that are potential plant pests are not planted in reserves. My comment is that they should not be allowed to even take root or get established in reserves. Clause 6.19(2) states, remove or contain all aggressive, troublesome pest plants from reserves where practicable. And my comment is it's imperative to remove them. The Tasman District Council has a duty of care and responsibility to safeguard our reserves, our citizens' health, and our heritage of our remnant lowland native forests. Here is an example of what is currently happening with the ongoing spread of woolly nightshade. In the Jimmy Lee, just above the reserve boundary, so that has the potential to affect the reserve, in the last 2 months, I spied woolly nightshade and thought I was dealing with 4 plants, but ended up pulling over 50. Then, nearby, in the forestry pine slash on the edge of the native bush, were bigger plants. I sought the help from Greg Pickford's team of volunteers, and Mike McConkey came to deal with what turned out to be another 100 plants in an area the size of this room, and that's plus the 50 that were there before. The next 2 patches, also Jimmy Lee, were also in these last 2 months. One patch, which appeared to be 1 plant, yielded 31 in a 3-metre square area. In the second, there were about 40. A total of over 220 plants on council land in 1 gully in the last 2 months. All 3 sites are new incursions. Photo 4 shows woolly nightshade in flower on council reserve land. Next one, that one, yes, on council reserve land. Just below, on the bank of the Jimmy Lee, just below the Wilkes Reserve Detention Dam. Photo 5 is about 5 metres upstream, closer to the dam. Both of these plants are flowering, and this is where children have access to the creek to explore, play, collect clay, and enjoy their childhood. In 2020, under the National Peace Plan Accord, woolly nightshade is one of 386 plants listed. It has spread to Farewell Spit, Takaka Hill, Richmond, and Cable Bay, to mention some sites. Up until the mid-1990s, it seems to have been localised until the TDC declassified it. Right now, its spread is rampant, which is tragic. Currently, woolly nightshade is flowering and producing another season of seed heads. And this seed head here has 47 seeds on it. It's 1 inflorescence. I'm aghast that the berries are forming so early, and also at the multitude of seeds 1 tree produces. The flower clusters on 345 Hill Street number well over 120, and that equates to 6,000 seeds of 1 tree. Photo 1 on the hillside. It's time for this council to be proactive. The wait and watch policy is a disaster, with the glaring example of the Eastern Foothills being testimony to the current wait and watch approach. In conclusion, the Tasman District Council needs to follow the Waikato District's mandatory removal policy. The TDC's current policy on this plant is a dismal failure. In my opinion, unless woolly nightshade removal is made mandatory, council officers are not empowered to address the issue, and some people will continue to choose to do nothing or not even recognise what it is, exacerbating the potential for its incursion into our reserves and native forests. Our reserves should be safe places for families and children to roam freely and explore. Woolly nightshade makes our reserves unsafe. The Tasman District Council should consider a proactive approach to rid us of this plant. Whether or not you wish to use this word, we cannot escape the fact that this plant is noxious. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Cook. We are slightly over time, which is not an issue, but would anyone like...
Sorry.
Oh, no, it was very interesting, and I've actually learnt an awful lot. And just so that you're aware, we have some people in the room who have really heard what you've had to say, and we'll discuss it if we're doing our deliberations. Does anybody have any questions for Mrs. Cook that would like to? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah. Well, look, once again, I just want to thank you. I mean, it sounds as though, you know, you're battling along, doing what you can to actually remove the plant.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm certainly interested and will want to hear more, maybe heads up Richard about, you know, what our plans are, because, yeah, it must be very frustrating. I completely sympathise with you.
Well, it's the explosion just in the last 2 months. I mean, we've been ticking along, and then this explosion in the last 2 months is absolutely horrific. And If we're not careful, it's going to get into our reserves, and they should be safe places. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Mrs. Lavers on Zoom from Golden Bay. If you're ready to go, would you like to start? Thank you. You've got 5 minutes.
Kia ora, Councillor Ellis, Atamarie Rangitirama. Yeah, I'm representing Dog Owners Golden Bay today. Thank you for listening to my submission. Dog Owners Golden Bay would like to mostly agree with the TDC plan to retain the mostly small parcels of land as recreational status, as we believe that the classification is the most likely to allow human freedom of movement, which we believe is going to be really important for the future. We'd like to express some concern over the definition of scenic reserves. We know that it doesn't necessarily mean that dogs aren't allowed or prohibited, but we believe that the devil is in the detail, and a lot of it comes down to what you decide is a sort of passive recreational exercise in those areas. I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about Milnthorpe Park Reserve, which I'm a member of, which is also classified as scenic, but I want to sort of show it as a case study, as an alternative way that conservation has been, and biodiversity has been encouraged whilst allowing human interaction and relationship with it. So basically how the classification could affect access in the future is something that we sort of wonder about. We know there's a huge push from conservation groups to prohibit people from areas in order to increase biodiversity. And we know that that makes it a very difficult job for council in balancing the needs of people. But we ask for you to think about what the definitions could mean in the future, as well as you're classifying them now. Especially with regard to the increase in development planned with the Urban Plan 2050. Dog Owners Golden Bay would like dog walking to be spread out. There's 3 reasons for that. One is having lots of dogs in a close area is not great. 2, people driving somewhere else to walk their dog down the road isn't great for climate change. Having places nearby is good. And it's basically biodiversity in an area where you've got lots of dogs together is also compromised. We believe in an inclusive approach to conservation where humans are part of nature and their relationships to it should be respected. If people are allowed in nature, it fosters health and community. I'd like to use the rest of my time to show this approach in action to prove that biodiversity and human presence can go hand in hand at places like Baigent's Reserve, which I know is under consideration today, and I know it's a scenic reserve. So I don't want to teach you to suck eggs because I'm sure many of you already know about Milnthorpe Park, but I'm just going to assume that you don't for now, in case there's anyone that isn't aware of it. I'm also aware that there are differences between Baigent Scenic Reserve and Milnthorpe Park. So I know that I'm talking about it in a pragmatic way, but I do believe that some of the approaches that we've used in Milnthorpe could be useful and are definitely food for thought when thinking about the scenic reserves over the hill there. Okay, so if you want to, I think Anna's worked really hard to get a slideshow ready. So do we show that now? I can't see the screen very well. Can you? Is it showing?
We're just having some technical issues, so we're just getting onto that for you at the moment, Katie.
That's okay, thank you. So I'll just start talking about Milnthorpe Park. So Milnthorpe Park was started in 1972. It's probably a larger parcel of land than Baigent's Reserve, and there's a smaller population in Golden Bay. It's between Collingwood and Onakaka. It's on the coast. It runs about 2 to 2.5 k's down the coast and 1.5 k's up square. It's got lots of intersecting pathways so that people can walk all around. Dogs have always been allowed, children have always been allowed. And it was basically one man, Dick Nichols, that started deciding that he was going to regenerate it as a bushland. So the idea is it's a human created rainforest. It had its 50th anniversary last weekend, which was attended by many, many people. And over the years since then, I think they've planted somewhere in the region of 55,000 trees to regenerate it. And unlike Baigent, which has a lovely stand of tōtara, this was just burnt off scrubland, pretty much the whole thing. And so my PowerPoint is really just some shots of before and after pictures for you to look at. So if there's a problem with the PowerPoint and we don't get to see it in the time, you can perhaps just have a look through once I finish my submission. So the idea, so in the initial stages of creating Milnthorpe Park, there was a huge amount of controversy and a lot of pushback. People didn't agree because because the soil was so poor, they planted lots of exotics. So they didn't take a purist approach with the native growing. So lots of eucalyptus, which steadfast the soil, and then underplanting with natives to grow up. So the eucalyptus grew up, they were fast growing, they dropped lots of leaves and humus. And part of the management plan is that anything that falls or drops in the forest is left. And some of the photos you can see lots of dead trees with lots of moss and things growing in them. And it's been very, very successful. And yeah, I just really wanted to show that. And there was a video I had, there's lots of remu. So the natives are amazing now, good under canopy, good understory. And that's all with people walking their dogs in those areas. So I don't believe that biodiversity or increasing biodiversity and having dogs are two mutually exclusive things. And I just wanted the council to know that and be aware of that in their deliberations. And children play in there. I've got photos of my children playing in the trees there, albeit in exotic Acer palmatum, not Acer palmatum, Acer japonicum, Japanese maple. I guess the other thing to say about it is that Milnthorpe Park relies mostly on donations. It doesn't have to write grants anymore because people have been allowed, people are invested in the park because they're able to use it. I run the trap line myself up the beach. I've got 10 traps that I'm in charge of because I'm allowed to walk my dog there. And they don't have to write grants anymore because so many people are involved in the park because they've been allowed to maintain their relationship with nature there. So in lieu of the PowerPoint, which is a shame because it's quite amazing to see the difference, please have a look at your leisure. Yeah, that's pretty much everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. Yes, sincerest apologies about the technical issues. What Gavin's going to do is he's going to distribute those slides to us so that we can see them before we do our deliberations. Thank you so much for all that information. It's lovely to hear how the reserves are working so well and the huge amount of work that you're all doing out there. Do any of you guys, panelists, like to have any questions or comments?
Kate, thanks for your presentation and yeah, shame about the film. I'm just wondering, are you advocating for dogs to be off leash in these scenic reserves or on leash?
I'm keen to have dogs be able to be exercised. I think that there is space for off leash and on leash. That's a really tough decision that you guys have to make, and I know that you have to be pragmatic about it. I'm a strong believer that there needs to be adequate spaces for dogs off leash to be able to run. And I don't think they cause as much damage. I think there's been a huge smear campaign on dogs in the media and through lobby groups the last 10 years. I don't think it's as bad as it's made out to be.
Thank you.
Any others? Okay, thank you, Katie, so much for presenting to us today.
Kia ora.
So that is the end of our public presentations. So thank you all so much for that. We're just going to move into now, Anna's going to speak to her report. And we're also, as a result of our submission with Mrs. Cook after her, if Richard would be able to come up and just do a bit of a speak about the woolly nightshade for us so that we can have more information as we're working through these deliberations. So thank you, Anna, and just like to take this opportunity to thank you so much for all the work that you've put in, because we don't always see behind the scenes the extensive amount of work that goes into preparing all of this information and presenting it in such a clear and useful way for us to be able to work through it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora koutou. So you have a copy of my report, which includes 3 attachments. I just thought I would talk a little bit about the process of how you classify reserves. So we're doing these ward by ward. We've done Motueka Ward and Motiri Waimea Ward. Oh, sorry. Is that better? So yes, we've done 2 wards already. Now we're looking at Richmond Ward and Lakes-Murchison Ward. And since we finished the Motiri Waimea one, the Baigent's bush came over to council, so that's why that one's been included into this package. It involves quite a long process of researching all the property files, the hard copy files, finding the titles to the land and checking information to check, one, is each parcel of land actually subject to the Reserves Act or not? And if it's not, it can't be classified. Also, some reserves have been classified in the past, so we had to find out what they all were. But what we've been consulting on is all the ones that are reserves that have never been classified. And there was 230 something of them this time. So we publicly notified these proposals on the 14th of October. Submissions closed on the 18th of November. We received a total of 15 written submissions, with 4 of the speakers speaking this morning. And today we'll do the deliberations. Then the hearing panels will make recommendations to full council, because under the Reserves Act, it used to be the Minister of Conservation was the only person who could classify reserves, but in 2013 or 14, the then Minister of Conservation delegated that responsibility to council, but only at the full council level. So the next step will be to take that report once you have all decided what classification you think each reserve should have. And then once full council approves that, staff will prepare a notice outlining what each classification is to go into the New Zealand Gazette. And it's not until that notice is published that the classification actually takes effect. So it's a little bit different to other council processes we do, and a little bit complicated, but we're getting there. And in terms of the recommended resolutions that are on page 2, you've got them there. We've given you 2 options, because there's either the option where you can decide to make changes based on the submissions, or you just agree that the classifications remain as publicly notified. And that's what we're going to be discussing as we work through the deliberations later today. So if you hopefully understand those 2 options, and if you've got any questions about that, let me know. But I think otherwise I will take my report as read and just happy to answer questions. I've emailed you all now the email I got from Katie with her video and her. But yeah, maybe during the break we could just make sure that we can get that working and people can look at it, because it seems to be crashing Gavin and I computers. So yeah, I think it might be good to have a break just to check that. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to give? And thank you, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Anna. I just wondered whether it might be useful just to cover off, I know it's not part of this process, but just the next process in terms of the full management plan, and how we go about that and how the public can be involved, because, you know, I think particularly the issues around you know, the approach to weeds and what can happen and what not is actually part of the next process, but it would be useful if you just covered that off here.
Yes, sure. So one of the reasons we do this step in the process first is because the Reserves Act requires that before you notify a draft reserve management plan, you've already classified the reserves. And that's because you need to know what the purpose of the reserve is to ensure that the policies that you write about them align with that purpose. But yes, the next step is there are existing management plans for both wards, which are quite old now. I think one's 1999 and the other one's 2005. So they're well overdue for review. So that's the second part to this project, is to prepare draft reserve management plans for both of those wards and all the reserves and parks within them. And that we're hoping to take to council, I think, in April to ask it to be publicly notified. Then there'll be a 2-month submission process, so likely May, June, then submission, hearings and deliberations like we're doing today, and then council will adopt those final reserve management plans. And we're at the same time we'll do draft text for inclusion in the existing Waitari Waimea one for the Baigent Bush Reserve as well. So does that answer? Yep, thanks.
Councillor Dakey?
Thank you through the chair. And I just, if you can't answer this simply, let it go. But just in simple terms, Jubilee Park is going to be not classified. And that's because it's not subject to the Reserves Act. Can you give a simple summary, if that's possible, within the legislation of why? Because a few people sort of commented on Jubilee Park saying, well, why haven't you included? Is there a simple reason you can answer why that isn't the case?
I guess, like you said, just simply because it is not subject to the Reserves Act. So at the time the council acquired that land, it was never made subject to the Act, and only reserves can be classified. So you can't just classify land that's not a reserve, but you can include it within a reserve management plan and talk about its future direction and treat it as if it's a reserve. And we do that for all parks and reserves in our network that we use for basically recreation purposes or similar purposes. Everything that Grant's team manages, we pull them all into the reserve management plan. And then our intention is, once the Nelson 10th reserve case is finished, all of those bits of land that we feel should be protected under the Reserves Act will go through and do a big public consultation process on our intention to declare them as reserve. But we're waiting until we've done the Golden Bay Ward as well, because we still don't know the status of all those bits of land. But eventually we have this big long list of places like Jubilee Park that, assuming council decides they want to protect it under the Reserves Act, we'd go through that process under Section 14 of the Reserves Act. And then I think at the time that happens, that automatically classifies it as well. So you'd say, we intend to declare Jubilee Park as a recreation reserve, say, something like that.
Okay, so possible future process and the reasons for it. And so if we purchase land now, we're generally classifying it as a reserve if that's the intent straight away, aren't we? So Patton Road, for example, becomes a reserve because that was the designation. So we've it's more historic things that are in that category of not being classified.
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't. When you can vest it as reserve, but you can't automatically classify it. You still have to go through the process. So every year we'll have to, like, once all the reserve wards are done, sort of year by year, we'll need to do catch-ups. But ideally, when we're taking land from subdivision or buying over whatever, we're making sure that the purpose on the title does reflect the intention of what we hope for that land more accurately, whereas in the past it's sometimes been a bit strange, which is what we're trying to change here.
Deputy Mayor Bryant.
So a question for you firstly, Madam. So are we going to work for the reserves? Because I would like to ask some questions about Baigent's Bush and Vanna. Or do you have you got another process in mind?
No, we haven't had too many issues regarding questions regarding so many reserves. So I was just going to go through and get some comments from everybody about each reserve, and we can deliberate about them after morning tea.
Yeah,
so just ask questions now, or
I can wait after. I don't mind either way.
Oh, you may as well ask them now. We've got
Okay,
ready
so
to go.
Just for clarity, I'm just a little confused whether what the situation is going to be with Baigent Scenic Bush with the dogs now. Because personally, I'd like to see the leash only.
Yeah, so that's more for the management plan itself rather than classification. But I think tomorrow you been asked to approve the new dog bylaw, which I think included as a dog control area. I'm not 100% sure. I'd need to look at the maps. But yeah, it wasn't not allowing dogs in there. I don't think. Like it's not a prohibited area. I could look in the break at what the map says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. I probably should have asked this question to the submitters, but I can't now, so I'll ask Anna, because you may have had discussions with the submitters. I'm just wondering, so in Wakefield, you know, we've got Baigent's Bush Reserve and we've got Edward Baigent's. Have you had any discussions with the community around how confusing that might be for people? Yes.
I don't know if Richard's maybe better to answer that. We at the opening we did get confused and had people going to Bogue
To the wrong reserve. I remember it.
yes. I mean, so there is an official process under the Reserves Act to formally name reserves. We have not chosen as a council to do that because part of that process, it's like quite a complicated process in itself. You have to go to the New Zealand Geographic Board and get approval for every single one you want to name in a certain way, as well as do all the consultation. So we've chosen to use the approach of the reserve as no one is, and that can actually be changed at any time.
Right.
So I guess it's the way it is now because that's what people wanted. But I don't know if people are now used to it. It says Pigeon Valley on the end of the new one. So,
right.
Like it says Baigent's Bush Pigeon Valley or something on the sign, doesn't it, Richard? Yeah.
Yeah.
To try to differentiate.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, we're not formally naming it and it's stuck like that forever. It's no one is. So we can choose to change in future if needed.
I just know that after we had the opening and there was the confusion, you know, a few people from the community did kind of talk about the fact that maybe they could be more differentiated in terms of the naming. But I mean, that's helpful to have Pigeon Valley at the end. It might be something that Mr. Baigent wants to just think about for the future, but not that I'm wanting to take your name off it at all, but it's just
Thank you, and I appreciate you making that point. We had an issue earlier last week turning up to lots of different places for a river care meeting, so I appreciate how important that naming actually is. We had Councillor Melling.
Yeah, just quickly, Anna, I noted in the classifications that all the new reserves are happening quickly, particularly Berryfield, because there's a number in there. And when you talked about Jubilee Park, I know that wasn't purchased in one lump. It was at least 3 purchases that I can recall over a number of, over many years. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think there's 18 parcels of land there, and so there probably was quite a few different purchases over time. Yeah, maybe like 2 or 3 at a time, but yeah.
I certainly recall when the stony ground down the far end and when young people were playing soccer, we used to get a lot of cuts on these, but it's now quite different, but it just takes time. But yeah, I knew that it had been purchased, but I didn't realise there was 18 lots.
Yeah, sometimes it's quite tricky as we catch up with the way we use these reserves and making sure that we get the paperwork up to date with it as well. So it shows the importance of this process. Does anybody else have any other questions that they'd like to? Oh,
well,
yes,
well, I'd just like to Richard to talk about the woolly nightshade, because I wonder if the deputy mayor was on the pest management committee, joint committee with the 2 councils. Yeah, but a long time ago, obviously. Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like a good point. Richard, thank you.
Okay, so it's Selena Mediterraneum or something like that, so from South America. It is a noxious weed in that it actually makes me physically ill. And it does seed prolifically. And we've been removing it from reserves, particularly Delside, Jimmy Lee, Hill Street South areas into Kingsland for a very long time now, and it has cost us a lot of money. It's consistent in cedar, and therefore you have to keep on top of it every year. So in the picture one Mrs. Cook showed, that was actually in the neighbour's property, and it's at high elevation, and it seeds every year and continues, and even moves further south. And I've seen it spread through down to Hope, basically. So it's becoming a problem. The biosecurities had a little conference about 2 or 3 years ago, and they actually went on site to have a look at the woolly nightshade because it's so prolific in our neighbour's property. Whether we can control it and remove it or eradicate it, I don't know. We'd certainly need to improve the knowledge, so it is in people's gardens. They don't recognise it as a weed. They may remove it because it does make them feel sick, and the leaves can be slightly itchy. So it does need to be re-looked at by the biosecurity team, and some thought in how you could actually increase its profile, understand how, if you could put something in place to try and improve control. I suspect the main property that's where the issue comes from at the moment, it may change with development. There may be opportunities in the future. Until that major seed source is controlled, then it's always going to be a problem.
So my understanding through the chair is we can't require people to remove it on their properties at the moment because it's not in our plan.
That's my understanding. So yeah, biosecurity need to be addressed.
Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Joe, through the chair. It kind of begs two questions, I guess. Do you know what consideration, given that we've just redone the regional pest management strategy, what discussions or consideration were had on it with that? And then I guess my second question would be, in terms of the property that seems to be the major seed source, have we simply gone and approached the property owner and had a discussion with them?
I can't answer that fully because it's not my position. I haven't been involved. I would suggest yes, it has been mentioned, and it's certainly an issue that the officers have talked about. Yeah, and they are seeing the spread. There is evidence of woolly nightshade in Golden Bay. It may be slightly, it might have better controls in Golden Bay, I'm not sure, and that would be a different seed source. Yeah, and it is a problem for other regional councils and local councils. Yeah.
Okay, well, it sounds like I have to take it up further with the biosecurity staff. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the explanation. I mean, it's a little out of scope of what we're actually here for today, but it's fundamentally important that it goes hand in hand with what we're doing and how we're going to manage these reserves into the future. So I appreciate the explanation. And I just wanted to check, there was a couple of submissions that came through, and we did have a wee chat about it, about Whitegate. And there was some who were wanting that area described as a scenic reserve. Could you just give us a bit of an understanding as to why we're not suggesting that today as part of this?
So at that particular reserve, it's made of 2 parcels of land, and one is subject to the Reserves Act, which is closer to here when you're driving there. I'm not sure what direction it's in. And then the one a bit further along is a bit more natural, but that's not subject to the Reserves Act. That's the one that has some protected trees on it and a bit of a native forest remnant. And if we were considering that, that one might be in contention. But unfortunately, the only part that is quite a narrow bit, which is basically just covered in crack willow and old man's beard at the moment, which we're in the process of. I'll let Richard talk about how we.
So the reserve's quite small. There's the surrounding land around the reserve as a whole is riddled with old man's beard, crack willow, broom, gorse, and because of the size of the reserve, it's it's not sustainable for a scenic reserve. We don't get that regeneration. It doesn't start to look after itself. There has been planting, there is weed control, and we do have some 2-3 beautiful trees in there which are well worth the effort of protecting them. But with the weed burden around them and the narrow nature of that reserve, it's not something that we could keep the weeds out to an extent that would benefit as a scenic reserve. There is a lot better sites.
Thank you so much for that. Does anybody else have anything that they've, or Anna or Richard? Okay, thank you. Might be a good chance to have a quick cuppa and a short break. So if we're back just after 10:30 and we can complete our deliberations, it's most likely that we'll move the report as it is, but like to take an opportunity if any of the panel members would like to make any comments. We'll do a round about any issues that you foresee or would like to raise. So yes, if we'd like to go and get a cup of tea, and we'll see you back here just after 10:30. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. Nice to have a break. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Anna, for sending through that information on the Baigent's Bush Pigeon Valley Reserve and showing that it's a dog-controlled area under the proposed new bylaw. Also, apologies. The video sent through by Mrs. Lavers is crashing a couple of computer systems. It's quite a big file, but we've had a very good description from Gavin, who's described a lovely park area with dogs and children and people enjoying it all together. So we've got a very good impression of what it's like. I think Councillor Dakey said it's on a website somewhere that we may be able to access later, but we've got quite a good understanding of what it's like. So apologies that we've had those technical issues. So as we're moving into deliberations, Anna, the motion, one of the motions is that we continue on with the recommendations within the staff report. There were some submissions that were different to staff recommendations. I'm wondering if you could just walk us through those submissions that and why you've stayed with the recommendation that we put this through as it is, please. Thank you so much.
Certainly. So if you look at attachment 1 to my report, that's this submission summary and staff comments to assist the deliberations. It starts with a little summary of how many were supporting and how many were opposing. So we did receive some opposition to the 3 types of classifications: the scenic reserves, the recreation reserves, and the local purpose reserves. There was only one to the scenic reserve, who was the submitter we heard online today, who would prefer it to be recreation rather than scenic. For that, in that case, so if we jump to Baigent's Bush, which is, I didn't number my pages. It's like 1, 2, 3, on page 4 of that attachment. I think I've written there about the purpose, how the purpose of scenic reserves doesn't automatically mean that dogs cannot be in there. Also, there's some other key points, as in when the land was gifted, the consent notice registered on the record of title explicitly stipulated that the land be vested as scenic reserve. And that is something that's also in the Reserves Act, is something you can do when you're considering classification. You need to consider any type of legal registration on the title matters. So if we were to change, as that one submitter proposed, to recreation, that would be going against the Act plus the consent notice plus their wishes. So that didn't seem like a good idea. what other things? Yeah, and in terms of it, what with Scenic Reserve, it needs to be either 1A or 1B. So 1A is for the larger reserve remnants, usually a remnant native bush or something, that, as Richard was saying before, can be sustained in the long term and are of sort of high quality, whereas Scenic Reserve B are more modified and maybe have the potential to grow into something better. We feel like Baigent's bush is already of a status that meets the 1A criteria, so that we recommend that we maintain the original proposals without change for that one and classify it as Scenic Reserve under sections 19(1)A. Any questions?
Deputy Mayor Bryant.
Yes. And I think it's probably come from the resource consent, the advice note. This is on page 16. And just around the, in consultation with the community, ensuring that the scenic reserve is managed for the purposes set out in the Act. So you've got to prepare a management plan. I started reading it a bit before I should have. So council will prepare a management plan in consultation with the community. So is that something we're looking at doing, or where are we at with that?
Yes, so as I was saying before, when we put out our draft reserve management plans for both Richmond and Lakes-Murchison, we'll also put out a new section that will be inserted into the existing Motiri Waimea ward on Baigent's bush.
Right.
So we'll do the consultation at the same time. It will go through the same 2-month submission period and hearings, and it will be not publicly notified along with the other two.
Okay, so you'll make the management plan open for consultation.
Well, only that section, that new section. So we'll consult just on the new text. For like within each management plan, each reserve has its own little section. So we'll include that, and then you can do a minor amendment to the plan once you approve, something to include.
Yeah.
So it will just, then we'll update the version of the overall plan to include it, if that makes sense.
A little complex, but yeah, because I just thinking someone might say, well, that was part of the consent. You've got to involve the community in this. So I guess that does that. I'm not sure that anyone ever checks the advice notes because they haven't got a lot of, what's the word, status really. They're just an advice note. It's not like they're a condition of consent.
It's registered on the title though in this case. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So it's something that we need to consider when we're classifying it. So I guess as a panel, are you happy with the staff proposal for that one? Okay. Next we'll go into the recreation reserves. So the main objections we received to these were people thinking recreation was not a high enough status and they wanted them to be scenic instead. So for example, I think it was the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum people asked for any coastal reserves that were recreation to be scenic, and there's actually only one of those, which is Sandeman Reserve. So sorry, I just have to remind myself what we said. Yeah, so even though that reserve does have some revegetation that's now getting quite established, it is a mix of both ecological values and highly used recreational values because it's part of the Great Taste Trail and has quite a few open areas that people can do passive recreation in. So it's kind of been developed with that in mind more than trying to completely revegetate the entire area and just have one little narrow path through it. So on balance. Oh, and I think in my report here I've said that the purpose of recreation reserves include protecting the ecological values, and then given its setting right beside the big Nelson Pine factory plus the industrial area, we didn't feel it really had scenic qualities high enough to justify that classification. So yes, any discussion or questions?
Councillor Melling?
If just in relation to that, you can see where the sea is actually reclaiming part of that reserve as you go through it now, and we've had to change the paths and everything else. People do use it to rest, and I see people sitting on seats because I just go through that reserve at least once a week on my e-bike. But it's also well used because there's good toilets there. But it's not a place where people go for just as destination. It's more of where they pass through. That would be my main comment. And I see that certainly the sea all along through there, the number of reserves that we've got around the estuary is going to change significantly over time. So I'm supportive of your opinion.
Yes. Grant?
So Anna and I had a bit of a discussion around some of the general requests for elevating the status of some of these reserves to scenic reserve. And one of the concerns I had was that it might limit what we could do in some of them in terms of we wanted structures or even buildings in some of these areas. They are, on the most part, highly modified. So, and I just didn't really think that a lot of them met the threshold for scenic reserve status, but Anna might have some other comments on that.
I think the other couple were Kingsland Forest Park and Whitegate Reserve in the Aniseed that we're proposing be recreation and people were asking to be scenic. So with Kingsland, there is one particular reserve that will be local purpose, just because it's always been the water, water supply. Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it? So the dual purpose of water supply and open space, was it? I'll have to look up the table now. But other than that, we were trying to now manage Kingsland Forest Park as a whole contiguous unit with the same, and we were thinking it makes sense to classify it all as one thing. And overall, due to the huge number of mountain bike and walking trips through there and high recreational use it has, we were thinking that recreation is the most appropriate. It also allows for the continuing forestry activity to happen. Although I think the only two actually being classified right now are down the bottom in the old, is it what was known as Delside, just up from Easby Park. There's a little map there on my showing the location of those two parcels. And they have stopped being in forestry for a long time anyway. They have some open areas and a lot of revegetating forest in there. Yeah, sorry, any questions?
Councillor Melling?
Not a question, just supportive. To me, it's used for stormwater as well. And within that Richmond Park, or that Kingsland Forest Park, we've still got some forestry activities to deal with in about 7 years' time. I think is when the last of it's got to be logged, 7 or 8 years. So we've got to be able to do that as well. But all of those creeks are part of our stormwater network as well. So I think it doesn't just have a scenic area, it's got a dual purpose. So that's why I think your classification is the correct one.
Is everyone in agreement that Kingsland, that those two parcels there should be recreation?
More concerned about the woolly nightshade, but that's another issue outside of scope.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. I think it's something to become a very big concern as we get more information about it. Have we worked through the list, Anna? Yeah, we can continue. Thank you.
So one more recreation one was Whitegate, which we did discuss just before. So everyone's happy with that reasoning. Okay, so then it's the local purpose ones, and again, get to the right page. So the Climate Forum people asked if some of the coastal reserves that we're proposing to be Esplanade could be scenic. Again, the size of these is so minimal that we felt that wasn't really appropriate. And as is mentioned, they are subject to sea level rise and may not be around for too long. Also, the esplanade status provides a lot of the same functions that Scenic requires. In addition, has the public access key part to it as well, which is important with the Great Chase Trail going through there. And then Jimmy Lee Creek was the other reserve there that someone asked to be made scenic. Again, that was probably one with the most, the highest kind of forest values there, but it does form the upper part of the Jimmy Lee Creek / stormwater network. And so we do feel, especially with unknown what's happening in the future about Three Waters, that it's really important. It is classified for its dual purpose of both stormwater, so utility, and esplanade. So that's what we're proposing for that one. And I think that was all of them.
Okay, thank you for that, Anna. I haven't heard anyone raise anything not backing Anna's recommendation. I just think I'd like to do a roundtable with a comment of anybody, and then maybe if we look, if I'm hearing it right, that we look to move from the chair recommendations 1 and 2 and 7 and 8. But if we get from your comments, so that's
Yep, and through the chair, apologies. I'd suggest you do it in parts. So take 1 and 2 together, and then you've got 2 blocks there. So you've got the either, which is 3 through 6, or 7 and 8, and in that way it's just nice and clear.
yeah, okay, that's great. So if I move from the chair 1 or 2, can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. And perhaps we'd like to do a round just to check that that is what we are. We are happy with 7 and 8. So looking for a mover and a seconder for that. But Councillor Mackenzie, would you like to start us off?
All right, thank you, Chair. Look, in actual fact, I'm happy to move 7 and 8. I think that this has been a thorough process, and Anna's done an absolutely fantastic job. Thank you, Anna, and everyone else who's contributed, and look forward to getting on to the work with regards to the management plans. So thank you very much. Nothing further to say.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Mellon?
Yep, I'm happy to second 7 and 8. I really like the explanations, Anna. It makes it really easy to follow, and it was logical. And if we look around the districts, some of the people that have made submissions have just had a focus on one part rather than looking at the dual purpose of some of the reserves that we have. That's all.
Thanks. I move from the chair. Councillor Dakey, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, no, thank you, staff, for the work on this, and easy to understand and sound decision making. And a lot of the issues submitters had, they're really a management issue, which they'll get a chance to have their say when we get to the actual park management plans, which will be exciting, because that's really what they're interested in. They're interested in conflict between mountain bikers, dogs, and that's the level where we find those details out, and so they'll have a chance to submit then. So very happy with the overall proposal.
Me, Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of comments and a couple of questions from me. So thanks very much for all your work you've done, Emma. Not Emma, Anna and Emma get muddled up in my brain syndrome. You must have great patience and perseverance to work through this sort of process. It can be time consuming and frustrating, I imagine, at times. So well done to you and the people around you. Great effort. Just a couple of questions I had, particularly related to Lakes-Murchison, just around a couple of reserves that I've sort of thought of in the last few days, but particularly after we had Murchison meetings yesterday, the Mataki Hall's now to come down, and that's not on our land. Will that change the status of that reserve in any way, or we need to modify that?
So that reserve is already classified, so it's not part of this
Okay.
today. It's Crown land, and we have been having some discussions about maybe having a key consultation question about, do we want to ask that the vesting and trust be removed and the land handed back to the Crown?
Right.
As something we could put forward as something to highlight in the consultation on the draft plan. But so that's one option. Otherwise, we can continue to manage it. But yeah.
And then I wonder about the old Marawea Hall site out on State Highway 65, which is just south of the one-lane bridge where south of the Marawea Falls. Most people drive past there and wouldn't even realise it's in the paddock, and whether we could offer that to the adjoining landowner, because the chances of that ever being used as a reserve is slim to nil.
Yes, again, that's one that's already been classified as a recreation reserve. The hall is gone. We have a grazing licence over it with the farmer adjoining. But again, it's a similar thing to the Matakitaki. We could have a key consultation question. Do we want to continue having to manage that grazing licence, or should we hand it back to the Crown by asking them to revoke the vesting and trust?
So is that Crown owned or
yes,
we own? Okay.
That's Crown owned. So we can't sell it, or yeah.
No, I always think of it. Probably not worth a lot, have they? Thank you. And
Thank you. Yeah, it's been well articulated by those around the table. I appreciate the work that you put in and the explanations as to why you're not suggesting any changes after submissions have been well thought out, logically brought to us, and very well explained. So I'm just like to put the motion that's been moved and seconded 1 and 2 and 7 and 8. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Oh, that's nice and quiet. So that's all moved. So
We have to put them separately? No?
do we have to put them separately?
Yes.
Okay, so all those in favour of recommendation 1 and 2, please say aye. Against? And those in favour of recommendation 7 and 8, moved and seconded by councillors McKenzie and Melling. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Thank you. So that brings our deliberations to a close. I'd just like to thank everybody for all the work that they've put in around the panel. They have read through all of the submissions and given really good thought to the comments made by submitters. I'd especially like to thank Anna for the work that she's put in and all the research and bringing to us very clear explanations as to why, so that we could make a good, clear decision today. Thanks, Gavin, for the work that you've put in and kept everything going, although we did have that issue with that file that's come through. So apologies again. We haven't had an opportunity to view it, but we have had a good understanding of what was in it. We will note that the proposals and the recommendation will be taken to the full council meeting on the 13th of February next year. And then any feedback will go back to the submitters as to why the decisions were made after that point. So there will be a bit of a delay for those people that have submitted, but it will be coming. We just have to work through that process. And I'd especially like to thank everybody who did submit and those that came in today to explain why they submitted. It's really important. I mean, it just shows how important these reserves are to our communities. And we're seeing good use, especially these new ones in berry fields. They are all being well used and are so valued by the community, and it just shows the importance of the work. Richard, your team I know has a big, and Grant, you have a big part to play in that, and so we're looking forward to getting those plans in place so that they are ready for everyone to use into the future. So thank you everybody for participating today. And I think that's it. I think we are done. We just finished with a closing karakia. Kia hiki te kōrero, kia watia, kia mama te manawa o te tangata. Kia uki te ara mō tātou e ora nei, ko ronga, ki runga, kia tina, hui e, tai ki. Thanks everybody. Thank you, Anna.